December 11, 2024. Asiana Airlines' last day on the Korean Stock Exchange. The final bell rings. The ticker fades. And in that moment, for years, 14 countries, and $1.6 billion later, Korean Air just swallowed its biggest rival. The result? A new mega carrier with over 60% of Korea's international flights. A top 10 global airline born from a deal that should have died a dozen times. This is the story of the airline merger that defied every odd. And it's about to change how you fly to Asia. Here's why you should care. Airlines are brutal businesses. Margins are thin, fuel prices swing, and one pandemic can wipe out years of profit. That's why airline mergers are rare. And when they happen, they usually fail. Just look at the US. American and US Airways merged in 2013, but it took years to integrate. United and Continental? Still dealing with cultural clashes a decade later. But in Asia, consolidation is almost unheard of. National pride, government protection, and stubborn unions keep flag carriers separate. So when Korean Air announced in 2020 that it would buy Asiana Airlines for $1.6 billion, the world's aviation industry stopped and stared. Because this isn't just about two Korean airlines. This is about who controls the skies over the fastest-growing aviation market on Earth. Asia is projected to account for over half of global air traffic by 2040. China has 3 megacarriers. Japan has ANA and JAL. But Korea? It had 2 airlines bleeding each other dry. Korean Air and Asiana together control roughly 60% of Korea's international passenger capacity. That's a level of market dominance that would make any antitrust regulator sweat. And it means that if this merger succeeds, it could reshape competition across the entire region. But here's the catch. Getting this deal done meant convincing 14 different countries that it wouldn't destroy competition. 14 separate regulators, each with their own demands. And every single one had the power to kill the deal. So how did Korean Air pull off the near impossible? To understand, we have to go back to the beginning. Korean Air started in 1969 as a small carrier with 8 planes. It grew with Korea's economic miracle, becoming a global brand known for both passengers and cargo. Asiana launched in 1988, right before the Seoul Olympics, as a challenger to Korean Air's dominance. For 3 decades, the two fought for every route, every business traveler, every cargo contract. The result? Overcapacity, price wars, and thin profits. By 2019, Asiana was drowning in over $8 billion of debt, and Korean Air wasn't much better. Then came COVID-19. The pandemic hit airlines harder than any event in history. Borders closed, traffic dropped 90%. Asiana was on life support, kept alive by government bailouts. Korean Air, however, had a secret weapon: its cargo business. When passenger flights stopped, Korean Air pivoted to cargo, moving everything from masks to semiconductors. That kept it afloat. And it gave its leadership an idea. Why not use this crisis to consolidate? In November 2020, Korean Air dropped a bombshell. It would acquire Asiana for $1.8 trillion, roughly $1.6 billion. The deal would create a mega carrier with over 250 aircraft, a top 10 global player. It would save Asiana from collapse, reduce domestic competition, and give Korea a champion to compete with China's Big Three and Japan's ANA and JAL. The vision was bold. But the execution? That was a nightmare. Because this wasn't just a Korean deal. Korean Air and Asiana fly to over 100 destinations in 40 countries. So every one of those countries had to approve the merger. The list was staggering: Korea, the US, the EU, China, Japan, Vietnam, Thailand, and 7 more. Each regulator would scrutinize whether the combined airline would have too much power on certain routes. And they wouldn't just rubber stamp it. They wanted blood. The man behind the deal was Walter Cho, chairman of Hanjin Group and Korean Air. He saw the merger as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to transform Korean Air from a mid-sized player to a global powerhouse. But he also knew the risks. Asiana's debt was massive, integration would be a nightmare, and regulators could kill the deal at any moment. Yet Cho pushed forward, convinced that without the merger, both airlines would eventually fail. It was a $1.6 billion bet on survival. The first test came at home. Korea's Fair Trade Commission, the KFTC, spent over a year analyzing the deal. In early 2022, they delivered their verdict, approval, but with conditions. Korean Air would have to surrender thousands of takeoff and landing slots at Seoul's Incheon Airport to low-cost carriers. They'd have to give up some of the most profitable international routes. And they'd have to cap prices on certain domestic routes. It was a heavy price, but Korean Air accepted. They thought that would be the end of it. They were wrong. The EU was the biggest hurdle. European regulators took a hard look at the merger and said, this will destroy competition on routes between Korea and Europe. Their demand was brutal: sell Asiana's cargo business entirely, and hand over key European routes to a competitor. For Korean Air, that was a gut punch. Asiana's cargo division was one of the reasons for the acquisition. It would make the combined entity a cargo giant. Giving it up felt like cutting off an arm. Walter Cho and his team fought for months, offering alternatives, but the EU wouldn't budge. The deal was on the brink of collapse. Then came the US. The Department of Justice also raised concerns about routes to the US, especially trans-Pacific cargo. They hinted they might sue to block. Other countries piled on. China demanded guarantees about connectivity. Japan worried about Haneda slots. Every week brought a new demand, a new condition. For 4 years, the Korean Air team lived in perpetual crisis mode. There were moments when they seriously considered walking away. The costs were mounting. The longer the deal dragged, the more Asiana's debt grew, and the more value leaked away. But Cho refused to give up. In early 2024, facing a hard deadline from the EU, Cho made the hardest call of his career. He agreed to sell Asiana's cargo business to a Korean low-cost carrier, Air Incheon. He also agreed to transfer European routes to Tway Air. It meant giving up billions in future revenue. But it was the only way to save the merger. The EU gave its conditional approval in February 2024. The US followed in June 2024, deciding not to challenge after additional concessions. One by one, the remaining countries fell in line. By November 2024, all 14 approvals were in hand. The deal that had been declared dead multiple times was finally alive. On December 11, 2024, Korean Air completed the acquisition, taking a 63.9% stake in Asiana. The new mega carrier now commands over 250 aircraft and roughly 60% of Korea's international capacity. It's a top 10 global airline. The integration will take years, but the hardest part is done. The lesson? Consolidation isn't for the faint-hearted. It requires sacrifice, patience, and the willingness to give up something valuable to gain something bigger. And in a region where airline mergers were thought impossible, Korean Air just proved they're not only possible, they can succeed. If you made it this far, you're exactly the kind of viewer who belongs on this channel. We break down the biggest business battles, the deals that reshape industries, and the CEOs who risk everything. Subscribe now and hit the bell so you never miss a story. And next time, we're diving into another high-stakes merger, this one in the tech world, where a $40 billion deal nearly destroyed a company. You won't want to miss it. Drop a comment below. Do you think this Korean Air mega carrier will lower prices or raise them? I'll read every single one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.